Today, we're excited to put on a panel, one of our breakout sessions of the day, Future-Focused National Security Workforce 2030. We have a panel of experts, some of my esteemed colleagues who are going to come up and speak to you about this critical mission topic. So with that, I want to go ahead and introduce our moderator, Sue Kalweit, who is a managing director at Deloitte. Sue and panel, please come up.
Thank you, Bishop, and I want to thank INSA and AFCEA for the opportunity for us to share with you what the workforce will look like in 2030 and how we're preparing in the intelligence and national security for that. In addition to my work at Deloitte as a managing director, I also am the vice chair for the AFCEA Intelligence Committee. And I'm really pleased to introduce or to bring up for the panel Maisha Glover, who's a partner with McKinsey. Christine Parker, who's a senior strategist and acting senior advisor to the Chief Human Capital Officer at the National Security Agency. Daniel Ragsdale, but please call him Rags, who is the Deputy Assistant National Cyber Director in the White House Office of National Cyber. And Justin Weissbrod, who's a Senior Customer Success Account Manager for Microsoft. And if you all would sit for a moment, I have a few housekeeping items to walk through with you before we do some very quick introductions. And hopefully you'll enjoy our approach to introductions. So first of all, questions. And we hope that you will have many questions. There'll be question cards that you can get. There's also sitting on your seat. If you fill one out, just raise your hand. Somebody will come and collect that, and they will be passed to me, and we'll allow for Q&A at the end of our formal Q&A that we have prepared. If any of you are interested in getting continuing education credits, this session does count for that. And if you want to obtain them, please make sure that you scan your badge at the end of this session so that we know you've been here the whole time. All right? And you can do that by the staff who will be in the back room. And then an email will be sent out to you after the whole summit is over. Media may be present today, so just be aware of that. We look forward to that. And after this session, we stand between you and a networking session for lunch and visiting the exhibit. So we encourage you to please take advantage, visit the exhibits, network with your colleagues, meet somebody new. And perhaps when you meet somebody new, you will use the approach we're going to use for introducing ourselves. So you all can Google or read in the program the official bios of all of us on the attendees, so we're not going to go through that. This is a panel about people, and so we're going to bring people into the introductions, and we're going to do that by sharing 3 characteristics that represent our authentic selves. For me, the first one is I'm the proud mother of 2 emerging professionals. One of which has a 4-month-old, so I'm also a new grandmother. My second is that I'm a creative innovator. I like to think about the future and where we go and how to get there. And third, an empathetic leader. And with that, we'll have Maisha and Christine, Rags, and Justin introduce themselves.
Well, first, thank you, INSA and AFCEA, for having us. I'm so excited to be a part of this panel, but also to listen to some of the other great speakers on the lineup. And to your point, Sue, bringing our authentic selves to what we do. I like to always say that I am a mom who works in national security that makes it happen, right? And the mom is my why. The mission work is why and how I support my why. And I lead through that lens. And the make it happen is because as I'm doing my mission work, as I'm serving in both either private or public sectors, I'm always encountering the, how do we get there? How can we do it? We can't do it. And so I say, no, we will make it happen. So I'm the maker of those things. So I say I'm a mom, mission, and maker. What about you, Christine?
I love it. That is great and hard to follow. So just want to echo Maisha's comments to say thank you all so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to talk about these, very serious workforce issues, but I also like to have a little fun with them, right? Because the truth is we spend a lot of time at work, whether we're working in a building, we're working in our home, but we spend a lot of time together. So I'll start, my first attribute is this love-hate relationship that I have with high heel shoes. Right? Can I get an amen on that? I see some people in the audience already that already put their sneakers and tennis shoes on, and I will be following you shortly. My sneakers are sitting in the room over across the hall. But I mention that one because it also reminds me, like early in my career, years, decades maybe ago, I felt like I had to look and present a certain way. And there's still some part of that, right? There's a part of me that wants to look and present a certain way. But I feel much less compelled to do that. And I feel much less like other people are compelling me to do that. And so it's kind of this nice reminder. I get to do this when I want, when your shoes match your shirts, pretty awesome. Makes me feel tall, right? All these things, I can do what I want, but I feel there's less judgment no matter what I do. So I think that's a really important thing. Secondly, I'm a social scientist. I'm an industrial psychologist by training. I work in an agency filled with some of the smartest people you'll ever meet. Like I get to meet smart people, plural, that some people wouldn't even get to meet one of these in their lifetime, right? So I work in this very soft skill social scientist world, and I'm surrounded by mathematicians. And so secretly, in the dark, I wish that I could also be a mathematician or a data scientist, or both, But that brings me to my third, right? The power of that math and that data science and that hard science coupled with the soft sciences is a really powerful thing. And the opportunity to take advantage of that, I think, is really helpful when we talk about workforce issues. And so my third attribute is just my passion for this tradecraft, my passion for human capital, people. This is a tradecraft. It's not a, hey, do this when you don't have time to do something else, focus on the people, right? There's a tradecraft behind this, and it should be thoughtful, and it should be planful, and it should be based in data. But we should also be realistic. Predicting behavior, explaining behavior, those are hard things to do. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Rags.
Okay, wonderful. So I am Rags, and please, if you run into me again, please call me Rags. Daniel is not what we're looking for. I associate that with my dear departed mother using that particular name in ways that cause me to have a visceral negative response, so please. So I want to start with first characteristic. I have a lifelong chronic addiction to learning. And it has been, I was inspired in high school by my physics teacher who said, that's what you need to do today, tomorrow, every day of your life. It is a great day, it's a good day, no matter how bad it turns out if you learned. So I took that to heart at that time, and I've tried to carry that with me. And as have all of you. You wouldn't be here today if you were not had an overwhelming interest in learning more, acquiring new knowledge, skills, etc. I would also say, as what I would like to consider myself to be a lifelong educator, that I am a attempted arsonist. So what is that all about? So William Butler Yeats, great Irish poet, once famously said, education is not about the filling of a bucket, it is about the lighting of a fire. And I had the good fortune to spend many years in the classroom. I had also the good fortune to run a number of workshops and camps for teachers, and that was the motto. That is what I challenged each of them to do, to bring as much positive energy they could to the undertaking, the grand undertaking of education for those folks that they are responsible for. And finally, I consider myself to be a doting dotard. So you might recall that Kim Jong-un used that particular phrase to describe a former political figure in our country. And what I'm trying to point out here is I have the blessing of not just 3 great kids who are now adults, but 7 grandchildren. And they are the center of my wife's and I's world. I'm not going to deny that I'm leaning into a period of time where I'll be able to spend more time with them. So that would be the 3 characteristics.
Hard to follow that. My 3 characteristics are committed to the success of others. I believe in paying it forward, that whatever my experience is, it should be easier for the next, right? Whether it's the next person, the next generation, or whoever it is that I'm working with. A resourceful and resilient professional. I think that one's self-evident. And then the last is an adaptable life hacker. I believe that working hard and working smart are 2 very different things. And if I ever have the opportunity, right, to work smart rather than work hard, I will absolutely take it. But part of that means learning those life hacks. So those are my 3.
Awesome. So I hope this gave you a little insight into who we each authentically are. And one takeaway should be we're about people. If nothing else, walk away with that. So in talking about 2030, the workforce of the 2030, I want to start by characterizing what might that workforce look like? Where are they coming from in their backgrounds and experience? And so I'll start with the workforce in 2030 are those 7th and 8th graders who just started school either this week or last week. Can you believe that? 7th and 8th graders will be the entrance into our workforce in 2030. Also in the 2030 are those who have entered the workforce right around 2020, right around the pandemic. Those are the future leaders of our workforce in 2030. So sort of characterizing where in the life experience we have the new entrants into the workforce and our leaders of that workforce. All of these future leaders and leaders at all levels have experienced their schoolwork from home during the pandemic or working wherever they choose at whatever time they felt was right for them during the pandemic. The pandemic, for sure, has had a significant perspective, given a significant perspective in where, how, and under what circumstances I work. In discussions that I've had with emerging professionals in AFCEA, we consider those under 45 years old. And I met with our AFCEA emerging professionals in the IC committee for a brainstorming session on what do you feel is going to be needed and want to have in the workforce of the future? What are your aspirations? Something that came up very consistently is the word flexibility. So we're going to talk about flexibility and all the ways that what flexibility means. And so with that, I'm going to start with the first question, which is, what are organizations or companies that are working in the intelligence and national security community doing to create workplace choice, possibly including working from different locations across the US? And if you want to add what new constructs may be needed to be developed in order to support these workplace choices. And Justin, I'll start with you.
So I think during the pandemic, right, we saw a couple things come into play. Obviously, for those in the community, right, blue gold scheduling, core working hours, alternative scheduling, right, compressed scheduling. All those are things that became more in line, more with the mainstream. But I think what needs to be built on from that, what I saw a little bit, but I think is going to be really, really important, is this move from a presence-driven outcome to results-driven outcomes, right? We're all familiar with the butts in seats mentality. And unfortunately, the pandemic highlighted butts in seats doesn't work. And if we shift that focus from a presence perspective to rather results, right, in terms of what the outcomes are, we're going to be a much better off in terms of how successful we are, in terms of how skilled our workforce is, and then also in terms of how happy our workforce is as well.
Yeah, so the outcomes, what you see folks are doing. And Christine, if you would add your perspective to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really great way to put it when you think about work, the flexibility that people expect in the workplace, and the flexibility we know they're going to expect well into the future. And so, you know, at NSA, historically, we have had some of that flexibility, right? We're, at least, you know, I can speak to my own experience. We have national locations where people work. We have international locations where people work. But those were always driven by mission, and should be, right? In some regard, they should be driven by mission. And I think what we're seeing now is a transition to merging your personal needs with the mission needs. And so I think the challenges that we're gonna have, especially on the federal side of this, is how we make those mergers happen and how we provide a structure in which we can let people do some of those things. Like, we're a really large employer, right? So every individual can't do whatever they want, but they certainly can have more flexibility than they have today. And so we're working really hard on what are those policy changes? What are just some, you know, some rule-based changes that we can put in place to let people merge their personal needs, wants, and desires with our mission results and expectations.
Awesome, so some policy and culture needs to make that merger happen.
Sure.
Rags?
Yeah, so I want to make sure that we're clear. So on the one perspective, while we have some national purview, I'm not in a position to speak for specific organizations, but I will tell you that we greatly applaud any of those efforts that, for example, a pilot that's going on at the IC campus on Fort Belvoir. Fabulous approach to perhaps creating the opportunity for those that need to be in a classified setting, but they have options now. There's more, think hoteling options where they can go to a workspace, could be closer to their homes, for example, and does not have them chained to a desk, you know, perhaps many miles away. So those kind of initiatives certainly have to be put in place. And I would say there's a vast array of technologies being developed that will support some of this. Mobile skiffs comes to mind, and I had the good fortune to have a background at DARPA, and I will tell you that we need to invest, do the science and technology, do the research to identify technologies that will support some of these flexible options. And I'm pleased to report that some of that work is ongoing. Not surprisingly, we can't discuss some of that work here, but I think that's gonna, in fact, leveraging both the technical side to better facilitate what we have in terms of providing flexible opportunities. What I will also say is, for every agency, this is gonna require a capital investment. If we need to make our workspaces more desirable to support this flexibility, to include not just more secure spaces, but more opportunity to access unsecure spaces in the workplace, right? We have this sort of two-headed beast where we lock away our open source intel sources from when we go into an environment. You might be like me. I self-identify as a hearing-impaired elderly gentleman, and it's an enormous pain in the neck, the fact that I have hearing aids. We need to streamline those processes. We need to make it easier, and it can be easier. We're risk-averse by our very nature, but we have to be prepared to do what's right for the people that are coming to contribute their talents to what we're trying to do.
So if I was to pull a thread across the three responses, I'd start off with sort of the overview of, Justin, your point around we need to measure success or measure by output, what we're delivering, the results, rather than just being in place. Because once we start to do that, then the ability to create the policies that allow us as individuals to sort of create, to balance, right, our professional and personal lives, and being able to leverage work wherever we can, where there are skiffs close by our home, will enable this flexibility that we hear. So continuing on with the notion that our world is changing in the workplace, the 9-to-5 workday and the 40-hour work week, which was originally developed in the industrial age, has long been supplanted, and the industrial age has now long been supplanted by the information age that we're in. So it puts the question in place, is the 9-to-5, 40-hour work week still the most appropriate construct for how our professional lives are guided? So Maisha, I'm going to start with you. What policies exist today supporting flexible work schedules? And as a companion question to that, what are the important enablers in an organization's culture to support flexible work schedules across a team?
Sue, I like this focus around the enablers, right? Because sometimes we think about theory, but in order to it to actually happen, the focus needs to be on these enablers and what are they and how do we do them? And you mentioned this 40-hour work week. As I was looking at it, it was actually 1926 Ford Motor Company, right? So assembly line focus. So think about that. The basis of most of modern day management is built on a 1926 assembly line model that, as you've referenced, has to evolve given the evolution of where we are, right? It's not an option. It has to evolve. We're not cogs, right, anymore. And so I like facts. So I like to just align us and ground us on just a couple of key facts from some of our research. Many times we assume that flexibility is really driven by women asking for it. I mentioned I'm a mom is the first thing. So sometimes people will assume that it's the mom who is really pushing for the flexibility. But our research notes that it's not just women who see tangible upsides with remote work. In fact, 29% of women and 25% of men who work remotely say that one of the biggest benefits is having fewer unpleasant interactions with some coworkers, right? It's like microaggressions and other things. But you think about that. So sometimes as we think about flexibility of workforce and what it is, how can we do things more efficiently? But the benefit is also like, how do we also have more enjoyment in the work that we do, especially in high-pressured, mission-driven roles like we all support. Another fact, half of women and a third of men point to offering significant flexibility in when and where employees work as top 3 factors in their organization's future of success. So when we think about the workforce and what the mind frame of where we're going, we want to be part of a successful organization, right? That's what inspires us to do more. That's what drives us to lean in more because we are focused on some important missions, right? So when we look at these enablers in an organization's culture to really support this flexibility, our research points to really 2 distinct things that I'm going to raise today. And one is we must reimagine the way that we collaborate, right? It's not an option. We must reimagine, not just take something from a model from 1926 and add a little things and switch it up a little bit and tweak it, but we must truly reimagine and look at it from a perspective of the interdependencies and the nature of the work, right? It is what must be in the skiff, who must be in the skiff, the right people, the right time, the right durations, the analysts and the engineers for how long and what, and to do what, and to achieve to the point that we've heard already, what outcomes. So that's the first. And there are 3 questions that our research really speaks to that we must answer. Number 1, what problems are the teams trying to solve, right? What outcomes-driven problems with specificity? Number 2, how will they know that they've been successful? To this point about measuring, right? How will they know? And then number 3, what are the sustainable and scalable team norms that we can continue and to scale, right? Not just you come in on Tuesdays or you use Zoom this way, but the holistic set of team norms that's going to result in those things. The second major question is, how do you create an inspired and empowered multi-generational workforce. And this is something that as I look around today and something that I think about our workforce, it's a must. I always say that in national security, sameness is not an asset, right? It's not an asset. And so we must have a multi-generational workforce. And sometimes there are many that feel like as we're bringing in people from the universities and they're coming in, then it's the question that I get, well, what about me? Am I needed? And the answer is absolutely. We need the most tenured, specialized national asset on space, Sue, as well as the person who's just graduated with a PhD in physics coming together. So this point around reimagining collaboration, we have to think about the strategies in which we have and what do we want to accomplish. And this multi-generational workforce is a requirement. And I just want to just cap this really quickly with like a snippet here. Right? I stepped in one time to a role, and a leader basically said, post-pandemic, Christine, a leader says, you know what? We got to get people back into the office. And we had a widely dispersed geographic, locations around the world. And he says, I have this great idea. I said, do share. He says, I think what we can do now that we can safely get into the office, we're going to have a chili cook-off. And I said, okay, we're gonna have a chili cook-off. And he laid this out like March Madness and drew it and how we gonna have the beans and the no beans, and it was deep, right? Then we're gonna have a chili cook-off. And I like a good chili. And he says, we're gonna have people use their own funds, their own times, and they're gonna pull out the crock pot, and they're gonna come into the office, and we're gonna connect, and we're gonna collaborate over this delicious chili. So the first thing that I do, because I like data, is I looked at my workforce demographics, right? And I looked to see that the majority of the persons that we have in our geographies were most likely not gonna find the chili cook-off funky fresh. I bet you that they most likely, right, did not have a crock pot on their holiday gift list, right? And so although I have grandma's crock pot and I like a good chili, I'm not sure that that alone was going to get to the result and answer the questions that I just raised, right? And so it was really about chili plus, because again, we must make sure that we maintain this multi-generational workforce. So be interested in your thoughts on it.
Yeah, Maisha, I love that. It's a poignant story, right? That kind of brings to light, and what you said about the generations in the workforce. And just personally, this is an exciting time. Like I said, I'm a social scientist, right? So in like 7 years from now, when we look back on this time, I guarantee this is gonna be something that we talk about for years and years. And so we have this moment right now where we can actually do some of the things you're talking about, right? And make them important. So how are we gonna structure ourselves to attract the workforce of the future? Well, we're gonna work with the workforce of the future. That's what we're gonna do, right? And we're gonna talk to them, and we're gonna get from them, like, what do you want and what do you need? I love going to work. I love it. But I'm not the workforce of the future, right? And so I need to understand that there are changes that I need to be open to and that I need to be able to manage within, right? So we talked about results driven. I don't need to look at you in the face to know that you're working. And that is a culture shift in a lot of the places where we do intelligence work, right? We talked about being kind of risk averse, but this idea that, well, can I trust you, right? We are not supposed to trust people. That is innate to our positions. And so we have this dichotomy of trust in our workforce, but not the trust in the work that we're doing, right? So we have to be able to put those things together and find a place where we're comfortable working uncomfortably. And I think this is a really great time for people who are coming up. Like, I'm hoping we have folks in this room that are thinking about doing internships in intelligence and security, and that are considering, like, what am I gonna do to make a difference? And I want you to be thinking about that from a mission perspective, of course, but I also want you to think about that from a human capital and personal perspective. Like, your thoughts and ideas are important. Our patience with each other, I think, is also important. Our ability to communicate and to shift the paradigm from communicating, mean we all get in a big room together and share a lunch and talk, to we can do this virtually, we don't have to look at each other, we can look at each other, right? My son is a musician, he had a meeting last night, the whole time he's on the meeting, he's playing his guitar. And I'm like, dude, it's kind of rude. And he's like, well, I'm on mute, so it's fine. And I'm like, well, can you pay attention? Like, what is happening? And he knows exactly what's happening. And he's like, this is how I decompress. This is how I remember. This is how I do it. Stop judging me. And I'm like, I'm not really judging you. It's just an observation. But I think these things are happening even in the workplace, right? Like, there are different ways to do this work, and we've just done it the same way because we didn't need to change. And some of the most exciting and most thought-provoking and most impactful things happen when we need to change. And if we're not, we're real good at responding to a crisis. And so if we think of this as a crisis, I guarantee that we will have the appropriate response, so.
Yeah, so I love your point about don't judge me. And going back to what you had said earlier regarding why some people don't want to necessarily go back into the office is because they don't feel judged there and can be their authentic selves. I want to pull the thread on the transparency and trust topic. That's coming out quite a bit. And those two words, transparency and trust, were the most frequently used words by the emerging professionals when I met with them and asked about their expectations from managers and leaders, okay? So when it comes to workplace expectations, transparency was associated with the expectations of individuals and teams, and trust was associated with individuality. Words like, meet me where I am, and every individual is different with different needs. Transparency and trust also was associated with the desire by emerging professionals to have honest and regular feedback on their performance as it relates to outcomes and impact of their work, not just the fact that they were there. So Justin, as a representative, now you won't speak for all emerging professionals, but you certainly live that life. What should people look for in a culture to know it is one where leaders and managers are transparent with their teammates and trust exists routinely among leaders, managers, and their workforce?
I think underlying that transparency is the question of accuracy, right? That it's not enough just to be transparent about whatever it is that managers are talking about with their managed people, but where's the evidence behind whatever that is? And I think in today's world, we're very, very focused on wanting to be quant heavy, right? What's the data and the metrics behind it? And I think the idea there is that people trust that more, right? Talking about the trust. They trust numbers and they trust the quant. But I think it's really important that we don't just deal in the black and white. We don't just deal with the quantifiable versus the qualifiable, but we work in some area of the gray. And that transparency and the accuracy behind it is going to require those managers to walk that fine line between the two, right? And bring both quantifiable, which I think is the emphasis today, but also qualifiable, which historically has probably been more of an emphasis, but still needs to retain importance when talking about these kinds of concepts.
That's awesome. Maisha, from the research and experiences you've had.
Yeah. So I think there are just 3 quick points. I think one is, does the leadership and the organization create opportunities to practice, train, and perform? Right? And what I mean by this is, if we were to go back to your point around the industrial age and the management style, I think right now we're really trying to look at our teams as elite athletes, right? Versus just assembly line, members. And so with these elite athletes, you need to train. You need to have opportunities to lean in. to take that chance, to potentially fail, to try new techniques, to collaborate differently. And you need to have some drills and opportunities where it is a safe space, a guarded space to try new things and not always think that you must perform at excellence. There's a time when you have to brief the board of directors. There's a time when you have to brief the 6th or the 7th floor. But there's also a time for you to train and to practice and to lean in. And as we use more technologies, we need people leaning in more. And so there's some couple of facts that really support this when you think about the need to not always feel like you have to perform, right? There's some research that shows that women with disabilities are far more likely to feel like they have to perform perfectly without being judged than women overall. This is from some of our work with women in the workplace with leanin.org. We're making some strides on this next point, but our research says between 2022 and 2023, 32% of women in technical and engineering roles are often the only woman in the room at work, always feeling like they have to perform, right? LGBTQ plus women are 2.5 times more likely to worry about appearing professional than women and men overall. So when you have large portions of your population that always feel like they gotta be on and always feel like they have to perform, we as leaders must make sure that we create time and space to practice, to train, and to perform. Number 2, really quickly, do leaders share their why, which goes to this transparency point, right? And then I think that Justin, you talked about, like, why am I thinking about this? If it's about the data or if it's about my qualitative assessment, I'm sharing why I am making these decisions. And then also, equally important, providing an opportunity and really emphasizing with your teams that you have an obligation to dissent, right? Not just that, please give me your insights and your thoughts, right? If you always feel like you have to perform, if you don't feel like you can say, are you really going to share? But if I say, you have an obligation to dissent, it sets a different tone. Number 3, organization structures, operating procedures, KPIs, the way you work must really be the way that you talk. There has to be alignment. Your walk has to be aligned with your talk if you want transparency in the workplace. Otherwise, I don't trust you, right? There's really quick snippet on this. I was stepped in for this role a while ago, and the whole focus is about people first. We got to worry. We all talk about retention, the war on talent, attrition rates, people first. And yet, when I stepped in to look at the business methods and the agenda for the meeting, there was no people on it. It was like, let's talk about our top line. Let's talk about our bottom line. Let's talk about the operating things. And I'm like, well, if we're saying that people are first and we're so committed to the talent, then why isn't it the priority bullet? And why are we not even talking about it for the agenda? So there has to be this alignment if we want to build this
That
trust.
consistency in what you say and what you do. So I want to, Christine, continue to build off of that with the next question. And we're really getting to, I think, the heart of treat me as an individual, include me for all of my differences and all of my experiences that I bring. So within the government organizations, what policies, practices, and behaviors exist in your organization that resonates with the desire for meet me where I am, bring me for who I am into the workplace?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. And Maisha, you had some really great points on this one where, to be successful, especially in these missions that we work, we have to be different. Like, we have to think differently. We have to appreciate different perspectives. And we have to create an environment where those different perspectives are heard, where people feel like they are able to share them, and where we actually do something about it, right? So, again, I can speak to NSA where I work. Every organization has their mission and vision and value statement. So it starts there, right? People is part of our core values, people. And that people value is defined in terms of respecting each other, being inclusive of each other's backgrounds, skills, differences. Integrity is another one. And when we talk about trust, I feel like that's a really important part of it. each and every one of us brings integrity to our jobs every day and puts it on display. And doing that helps us build trust between each other, right? So showing up every day, holding that integrity core value at the forefront of your work builds the trust that you need in order to have some of these really difficult decisions. So there are like structural things we can do, right? We have employee resource groups. The agency spends a lot of time celebrating differences, right? Making sure that we're talking about things that might make people uncomfortable or might make them feel like they're not part of the crowd. But it's an individual thing too, right? So as a leader and as an employee, as a non-leader, right? Talking to each other, whether that's face-to-face or virtually or over IM and Skype and shooting each other a message, but just that having the structure in your workplace that enables you to talk to one another about these things, it carries so much weight and it only makes us better, right? So yeah, we can put policy in place. Yes, we do. Yes, we can put structure in place. We can encourage people to take advantage of that structure, but what it comes down to is how we treat each other and how we find the best in each other and use it to make ourselves better as a community. And I think each and every one of us in this room has the ability to do that in our own workplace.
That's great. And Rags, could you add to that from a government perspective, policies, behaviors?
Yeah, absolutely. And
Right.
so right up front, mileage varies. So I come from an organization where we do classified work, but the majority of work is unclassified. So we have, frankly, some very flexible telework and remote opportunities. And of course, that works well for us and may not work well for others. But I think to the point that's been made here, it really comes down to it's a leadership issue at its core. Right, well, and some of the simple sort of bumper sticker, mission first, people always. But I think one thing that COVID certainly taught us is we still have to do the mission, irrespective of the circumstances. And largely, we were able to do the mission by making more investments in the people. So the policies, again, will vary, certainly. The practices will vary. But I want to provide maybe just the flip side of this issue of meeting everyone where they are to make sure that everyone here knows this. We are protecting sources and methods. We're protecting information to prevent exceptionally grave damage to national security. And we all know this. You don't need to hear this, and I'm not here to lecture to you. But those that we want to bring into the workforce, we've got to help them appreciate that better. That there will be, the importance of the mission is so great that there will be inconvenience. There will be sacrifice. It's a part of what we do. It's a part of what we are. And you all live that, and all of your lives, I think, have been more rewarding and fulfilling by virtue of the sacrifices you've made in the interest of something larger than all ourselves. So, in part, I think at the plenary they talked about education. There's a communicating that message clearly to those that we want to bring into the family and to continue to reinforce that, because certainly we need to do everything we can, but there will always be a limit. And in that context, leaders providing purpose, direction, motivation can hopefully help continue to retain the valuable talent that we brought in, to recruit new talent to the important mission that we have before us. So I think it's also important in this context to highlight that.
Yeah, Rags, I love the fact that you pointed out we're all here talking about intelligence and national security because it's a mission that's bigger than all of us. Whether we're in government, whether we're in industry, whether we're part of the academia community, it's because it's for something beyond ourselves. A wise mentor and friend of mine said, the mission will always be there. As humans, we will always step up to do the mission, always. We have to pay attention to people first, because it's easy for people to take a back seat to the mission when there's constantly something, questions and needs, right, that are out there. So I'm a people first, mission always type of leader. And with that, I'm gonna go to some questions in the audience. And now that we've excited folks about joining, right, they can sort of see that the world of the national security intelligence community, that workplace, will be a place for me to bring whatever I have. How do I get into it is the question. And let me first characterize it as, we have folks in the audience who are in high school right now. They're like, what should I be studying? What skills do I need to develop? What should I be thinking about in high school as well as I think about college or doing military service? And then we also have folks in the office who are more longer in their career and are seeking to get a clearance. They want to join their mid-career or perhaps a little later than mid-career, and they want to become part of this community. But it's a long process, right, to get your clearance. So what is it? What advice do we have? And I'm going to start with Christine, right, first. What advice do you have for the skills, the experience to get in?
Right. So, you know, there's experience in the traditional way we think about experience, right? Take some cyber classes, right? Take some math classes, do a concentration maybe in cybersecurity, do an internship. And NSA has high school work-study programs, internship opportunities, right? There's that normal kind of trajectory of education into your professional life. That stuff is written all over our website. You can visit it anytime and read up on what you need to do and what the qualifications are. But we talked a lot today about just kind of the changing nature of work and the changing nature of people at work. And I think we're on a precipice of, and just the changes, the rapid changes in technology, and the way they are going to influence how we work. And so, yes, you need to have the skills, right? Yes, it's do a high school work study, take an internship, whether it's with NSA, whether it's with the Intel community, whether it's with a private sector partner, right? We all benefit from that. This is a shared community, and we have to start thinking of it that way. But the other kind of just qualities that are going to make people successful in the future are things like your ability to adapt and be resilient, and your confidence in your knowledge that you can bring that knowledge to the way things are going to change. I mean, just think about, just like with generative AI, just the little teeny toe that we've stuck in this edge of the pool, how much potential that has to rapidly change the way you do work. And so I think success in the future is going to be a combination of your knowledge, skills, your abilities, but also just kind of your inherent characteristics, your ability to adapt and change, your ability to be patient with change, your ability to work through, like be persistent. Those are some of the things, those softer people-based skills that I think are going to become major separators of those who have enormous success and those who kind of just continue along a normal path. So, to get back to like, what am I supposed to do? You visit intelligencecareers.gov. There's a lot of information there. It is a long process, but it's worth it. Really, it's long for a reason, right? This is important stuff. I mean, I think Rags brought us all back to reality around that. These are important missions, and we need to be very careful and cautious about who we let into this family. And so, yeah, that takes a minute. But it's worth it in the end, and you get to demonstrate your persistence and your adaptability, and you can use that, right, in this community that we share among one another. So whether you're going through that process to be a government employee, someday you might go work for a contractor, someday you might go represent the government to an academic institution, or vice versa, and all those things are encouraged, and so it makes that process even more worth it.
Maisha, as a hiring manager, what do you encourage folks who want to join the intelligence community on the contracting side to have in their toolkit in the way of skills and experience?
I had a recent person in government talk about soft skills, and this person said, I now call them power skills. And I said, ooh, I like that, right? I like that a lot. And so I said, you know what, that's what I look for. I look for power skills, right? And as you mentioned, Christine, kind of where we are right now, I think this is a great opportunity for people to lean in for those things. So I'm looking at creative problem solving, not just strong problem solving, not traditional status quo problem solving, but I want the person that loves, theater and dance and also loves engineering. I want the person that has, a background in liberal arts and has kind of leaned in to maybe taking courses around AI prompted. And then they're looking at the intersectionality of those things. Because to your point, as we think about the role of Gen AI, and then right behind that, quantum and HPC, all of these technologies that are on the cusp, a lot of things that we are doing today, these rote things that we're doing, will be kind of subsumed by some of the technology. So what's going to be left is, do you have these power skills? Can you collaboratively come together, think differently, analyze the data differently, and work together? So those are the things that I'm looking for.
Thank you. All right, Justin, I'm going to go to you with a question from the audience, right? Semper Gumby, always flexible. All right. The question is, how can the intelligence community, national security community, become more appealing to the Gen Z, right? Given no cell phones allowed in the workplace, given that they have high expectations for the technology advancement that may not always be realized when they get into the workplace, some of the constraints around the GS pay scale, which also affects industry because of the limitations in what can be offered to meet government expectations. So share with us your thoughts on this.
I got a long list, much longer list over here. I think one of the things, and certainly what I've seen when we're talking about the future, right, and Workforce 2030, is they'll have grown up in an age where personal privacy is paramount, right? Every single large tech company talks about what they're doing to protect your personal data. And at least my experience in the IC started with recruitment all the way through the clearance process, right, was the exact opposite. Surrender your privacy, right? Be an open book. And the idea, right, is that you be an open book and we'll be able to judge you accordingly, right? We talk about this family, right?
It's not
There's
judgment.
going to
It's not judgment, okay?
There's going to have to be some reckoning with that, right? And it's not me saying that all of a sudden personal privacy is no longer the case, but how do you reconcile the fact that, yes, we want this new generation in the workforce to be comfortable with surrendering certain things, right? The no cell phone, when you're going through the clearance process, being an open book. I don't think we're there yet, but I think that's something that's really important that we're going to have to talk about. The other important thing, at least for me, that I've seen is that we talk about Workforce 2030, and I think right now, right, we talk about what would be important, and a lot of the important things mentioned by the panelists here, definitely relevant, but one that I didn't hear, right, is data. And especially for myself, coming from the Gen AI deployment in the IC, the backbone of everything is going to be data. And while I think today a power skill might be data visualization or data management, in the future, it's not going to be a skill. It's going to be just an assumed thing that you must know how to do. A doctor treating a patient, right? Just as a doctor treating a patient, the patient expects the doctor to know what's anatomically going on. They also want the doctor to know what's going on the molecular level. Data is the backbone for all AI, all Gen AI topics. Every single person is going to have to be familiar with it, comfortable with it, and be able to engage with it in a multitude of ways.
Thanks, Justin. So I'll say that it's clear that many in the audience are appreciating the flexibilities that we're talking about here on stage. And that among some of us who are contractors in the audience are thinking, well, government is getting flexibilities, but when I'm a contractor constrained by an 1860-hour contract, that is level of effort counted for hours, and I've had contracts where the government has also penalized me if I don't deliver 1860 hours. How are contractors considered in the partnership that's required, as we heard by the plenary speakers? How are contractors going to be considered in this flexible work environment of the future? And Rags, I'll start with you and give Christine just a few minutes to think about that, okay?
Thank you,
Yeah.
So as I've spent 40 years employed by the Department of Defense, 42 all in by the federal government. So in 2 glorious years, I broke away and I was in a defense industrial base, a medium-sized company. So got a chance to see that and experience it. And it's a challenge, let there be no doubt. And I actually think that this is yet another area we need to bring some innovation to, certainly. On the workforce side of things, a very specific issue that my office has been advocating for that doesn't address this issue directly, but it's providing those that are doing contract work for the federal government the opportunity to bring in members of the workforce that do not have, for example, 4-year degrees. So bringing skill-based approaches, skill-based hiring, skill-based in contracts. It actually doesn't matter whether or not they have a specific degree. Having been a professor for many years, of course, I believe in the great value of those, but they're not necessary in every case. So providing greater flexibility in the context of what we do in terms of bringing help in, but in terms of the butts and seats, hours, in front of a monitor, the innovation need to be brought to this is we should speak to capabilities, not FTEs. Right. You need to be able to perform a given function, and irrespective of what the workforce that you bring to bear, irrespective of the number of hours and number of butts and seats, it is that kind of thinking that will get us to a better place.
Measured by outcomes, not the 9-to-5 job.
Yeah.
Christine.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with a couple points. One, this is a tough problem, right? And that we do, like there is a shift. It's not just in our workforce, it's in the way we think about how we interact with each other. Rethinking that, hours are easy to count, right? They're easy to know you did it, right? They're easy to hold people accountable. Yeah. And we need to start thinking of different and better ways to hold accountability, right? And so that's a very real thing. Are we there? No. But will we be? I think we will. And the other thing is, just there are upsides and downsides to any member of this community, right? There are times in your life, like I was a contractor as well at a much smaller company, at a time in my life when I loved the work, I worked a lot of hours, it fit my schedule, it's exactly what I wanted to do, and then there was a time in my life that it wasn't, and so I was able to change, and I came onto the government side where the expectations were different, not more or less, right? There's still that important mission I have to do, but I do it in a different way. And one day when I don't want to be in the government or don't need to be in the government, not saying that's going to happen, I know that I have the opportunity to maybe try something else again, but I need to do that knowing what the expectation is on me and make those choices based on what works for me. And we spend a lot of time today talking about what works for me, right? And so own that, right? Make decisions about what works for you at a time in your life and in your career. And I think by us all being up here thinking, working together across the community, we can open some of those opportunities to people who need to make some changes based on what they need in their life. So I don't have a solution, but I do have a way to think about it, and I think in a way to approach that problem.
Yeah.
And in the way of bringing all the ideas together, perhaps the solution sits out there
Right.
among us. So our time has come. It went by very quickly. I want to thank our panelists so much for the engaging conversation. I want to thank all of you for your questions. We didn't get to all of your questions that I have. Please feel free to approach the panelists, network during the lunchtime, and have a great rest of the day at the conference. Thank you.
Thank you.